Hey, Kotaku, Evan Narcisse here with my boss, Stephen Totilo. This time I get to make him answer my questions. Namely, we're talking about comics today. These last few weeks, those are actual comics printed on paper. A rarity in both of our lives right now. Most of us.
$2.99 for this.
We're reading
Wow.
mostly on tablets now, right?
Yep.
So these last few weeks, I haven't had the time to round up the comics I've been reading and liking. So I figured we'd do a chat over video. Steven just came back from vacation, and he read a bunch of stuff.
A lot. Yeah.
So let's talk about first the stuff that's out this week. One, because I know it's one of your favorite writers, Grant Morrison on.
Not
Batman.
One of. He's the
favorite.
man.
Okay.
The
All
best
right.
ever.
Okay, he's the pinnacle of Totilo's fandom.
I think he might have passed Alan Moore for me at some point.
Now, is that because he's not quite as grumpy as Alan Moore has been of late?
No, I mean, look, Alan Moore's best is better than Grant Morrison's best, I think. Because I think that Watchmen, From Hell, V for Vendetta are all probably beyond anything Morrison has ever written. But he's got, to me, those three all-time greats. And Morrison is Morrison's just had more steam. He's just lasted longer with.
He's more prolific.
The new X-Men, Invisibles, Filth, Sea Guy, We Three, Seven Soldiers, All-Star Superman, Animal Man, Doom Patrol. I just read while I was on vacation his Action Comics run, which I thought wasn't actually that good when I was reading it in single issues, that I bailed and waited to read the rest collected. My God, that thing's amazing when you read it in one fell swoop. It's like a multi-dimensional comic book because it's all actually out of order and you can read it and so good. Take that, Alan Moore.
You know, it's funny because I wrote recently about the state of Superman for the site, and I think Morrison's run has been one of the few high points because if you walk away from that whole run, you get a sense of Superman upholding these ideals that he's always kind of been assigned: truth, justice, the American way, but also like a lot of compassion. This kind of never say die spirit, but also like he reinvents the mythology in really cool ways. One of my favorite bits from that run is the singing spaceship. Like this idea is like this spaceship is like a nanny, and it's this living reminder of what he lost. So yeah, it's really, really good stuff. I just don't know what they're gonna do with Superman now that he's off of it.
Neither do they.
Yeah. Oh, that's a whole other thing. But you also read Happy, his Image Comics creator-owned book.
I declared it one of his lesser works down there with Vinama-Rama, which I don't think I've ever said out loud before. I said Vinama-Rama. It does? Okay.
I liked Happy a lot because I thought that this was his imagination, like the id part of his imagination, like not being restrained by like superhero comic conventions.
Right, and for those who don't know, so Happy is 4 issues from Image. They just announced that he's going to do a Christmas edition where they're going to add more pages to it. But I love Morrison, but I'm not going to go in for just 10 more pages.
Right.
Derek Robertson draws it. He drew Transmetropolitan and The Boys. And it's about a hitman, this real gnarly, nasty, foul-mouthed guy. It's a very violent comic. And early on, he starts... he encounters, it's like a blue talking horse, is that it? Or donkey or something?
It's like a jackass.
Yeah, and he's called Happy, and I think he's called Happy, and he's the only, and this hitman is the only guy who can see him. And why can he see this figment of his imagination, or is it a figment of his imagination? And this thing is like a saccharine sweet, so it's a little Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and it's like real life with the cartoon character shows up. But then it turns into both a crime thing, and it gets emotional. All of Morrison's stuff is very emotional.
Yeah.
And usually very hopeful by the end, optimistic. This one, I guess we shouldn't talk about how it ends for those who want to read it. But you liked it more than I did.
I think that's
true. I felt
true.
it was just kind of like, it didn't have a lot of weight to it, and I really like how rich and complex, and therefore how hefty a lot of Morrison's work.
Well, that's one of the things Morrison is able to do when he's working inside like these long, like thorny continuities like DC and Marvel, right? He's able to really kind of like fuse angles together in ways that are interesting. He did it in his X-Men run in some surprising ways, even if some of that stuff got undone by editorial.
Some of it was also misunderstood. Like they actually didn't know how it ended. Speaking of Grant Morrison and long continuities and long runs.
What?
Well, I'm segueing you.
Yo, you segueing me to Batman? Sure. I didn't want to talk about it.
Trying to help him out.
He's a good boss. I didn't want to talk about it because I know you haven't read it.
I read it. I read it in preparation for the show.
Are you caught up?
I knew I was coming on to the show.
That's very sweet of you. I think it's a great finale to what's been a really good run on one of DC's biggest characters.
If you can't make this out super clearly, this is Batman Incorporated, Volume 2, Issue 13. I think it's like Infinite Regression, Chris Burnham thing. Supposedly Grant Morrison did an alternate cover, but I haven't seen that.
No, I haven't seen it either.
This is the culmination of a 7-year run.
Yeah.
That I, of course, am like, I don't know what I'm less professionally critical of, capable of being professionally critical of, Grant Morrison or Assassin's Creed. I mean, God forbid Grant Morrison never wrote an Assassin's Creed comic. I was just a total fanboy drooling through the whole thing. But what did you think of this? You were thumbs up on it?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. It's funny because Grant Morrison gives you different modes, right? Like, We 3 is like this really emotional kind of like a journey of these cybernetic pets and how they kind of gain their freedom. This was like big scale, like it's almost like you were reading a musical, right? Because instead of the singing, there's explosions and the characters declaim their emotions and their intent in these very like grandiose ways.
He in an interview he described the last issue as being staged like opera.
Yeah, it is operatic, and it just quivers on the right side of being corny, but you also feel like that's him paying homage to the corniness of the Silver Age and all these other different interpretations of Batman.
Right. Yeah. So over the course of 7 years, and with a really weird publishing history, because initially he was writing the self-titled or eponymous, is that what we call it? I don't know what I'm saying. Batman comic.
Sure. Let's
for
just go with Batman.
several issues. Then he got caught up in his own crossover with Final Crisis, and so he had weird stuff happening. And the issue changed. So he did a couple issues of Detective. Then he seemingly killed off Batman, and so we had Return of Bruce Wayne, which was this amazing time travel 6-issue epic where you went Bruce Wayne basically through different eras and different storytelling styles, from detective stories to westerns and that kind of thing. And then there was the Batman and Robin series, where with Bruce Wayne off the table, we had Dick Grayson as Batman. Throughout all this, we had Batman's son, named Damian, who's 8 years old or whatever, as Robin.
I want to say 10, but
Okay.
sure.
And that was a Morrison creation, and he's sort of like smart alecky Robin.
Not a Morrison
character.
creation. I'm going to go there on you.
Oh,
He
really?
was created by Mike Barr in Son of the Demon, a graphic novel from the 80s.
Okay.
And which was kind of like DC's old graphic novels were like, are they in continuity? Are they not? I don't know.
Right, and Batman sleeps with Ra's al Ghul.
Daughter,
Ra's al
yeah.
Ghul? Ra's al Ghul?
Raish, I always say Raish.
Ra's al Ghul, okay.
Uh,
Daughter, Talia.
Yeah.
And so they have a baby in that.
Right.
Okay.
So
all right.
that was always left on some dusty bookshelf in terms of the official Batman continuity. So what Morrison does, he's like, he brings it in, he makes a canon,
Right.
and then that's, you know.
Dick Grayson as Batman is amazing in the Batman and Robin series that he does. And then there's Batman Incorporated, where Batman comes back to the present day. He's alive and everything. And he's got a whole like network of Batman. And through all of these things, to your point, there was different flavors of it because the eponymous, we're going to go with eponymous. The eponymous Batman run was all about Batman kind of going crazy, right? With the Batman of Zur-Anar and all that, and what happens when Batman is confronted by essentially the most evil enemy he could fight. I don't want to spoil that either. And does Batman have the ultimate backup plan? Because Morrison's really into Batman as the ultimate person.
Yeah. Master strategist.
I was going to say the ultimate man, but that's Aztec.
Well, no, you're right. He wrote
That's a
back in
deep
the day.
Morrison cut for
That's a
you.
deep
For your viewers out there. That was a good series. So that run was about Batman as the ultimate man. Ultimately, what plans does he have for the ultimate problem he's going to have? The Bruce Wayne miniseries to me was about sort of exploring different types of storytelling.
Yeah.
The Batman and Robin thing, I don't know, that was just a new pairing with Dick Grayson as Batman and Damian as Robin. And that was just fun. I don't really remember.
Lots of new characters in there.
Yeah.
Some of them which you're starting to see in other media, like Professor Pigs on the new Batman show.
And Frank Quitely drawing up a storm in that series.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
So it was really good stuff.
And then the Batman Inc. stuff was, I think, maybe the most unexpected flavor of it all. And it was this one that in the way felt the newest to me, that I hadn't read anything Batman like this before, where he began to pull in a lot of other existing Batman creations or new ones of his own, and riffing off what would it mean for there to be a Batman out of Japanese culture or out of Native American culture, and which of the tropes of a Batman and a Robin actually carry through or not.
And even carrying in some of the stylings of camp from the TV show. There were a couple of issues there that were like, will the Caped Crusader survive whatever the hell? And it's he's making this work in a very like straight-faced way. He's not snickering at it. He's like, yeah, I'm going to pull this in too.
Yeah. So for me, as a as a Morrison fan and as a big fan of this run, I was really stressed by the change to the introduction of the New 52 because most of you who are watching this probably know DC reboots their continuity with the New 52, but there were a couple of things that were relatively untouched. Green Lantern and Batman, would you say, was largely untouched. They undid a couple of characters. Stephanie Brown, Batgirl, to great notoriety, was removed. But they didn't, while they left it untouched, they went from having Morrison be the creative lead on the series to Scott Snyder really became the guy who his book, he was now writing the eponymous Batman.
The mainline Batman book.
Yeah. There's adjective on it. It's called the eponymous Batman. So Uncanny X-Men, the eponymous Batman. And that seemed to become the main event. And so the Morrison stuff was kind of pushed to the side, which...
Operating in its own pocket universe.
Yeah, kind of weird. Although he does have a shout out to Scott Snyder's new crossover, Zero Year.
That's right, yeah.
In this, the Batman line crossover. But the more recent Volume 2 of Batman Inc., I only read through it a couple of weeks ago. I put it to the side. I'm like, Morrison is really rewarding to read in clumps and chunks, and he plots it all through really well. He knows where he's going. And so I thought, okay, I'll reward myself then by waiting to read, because I knew it was only going to be like a 12, 13 issue run.
Which makes it impossible to talk comics with you.
Yeah, sorry. Finally, we're talking
You've got
comics.
other stuff to do.
And this run was the most surface of anything that was happening. There was very little subtext, I felt, to this. And it really just was building to this crescendo of Talia's back into the picture, Batman's there, Damian's there, and so there's a mother, there's a father, there's a son, and there's a lot of drama surrounding all that. And I think you hit on it by calling it a musical, or Morrison saying it was operatic. And it finally gets to this issue, and while it still feels a bit removed from everything else, I found it very satisfying. It ended really well, and it brought back a couple of the different threads of characters he had in there. And then in all of this, he finally returns, and this was unexpected, to Jim Gordon.
Yeah.
And I felt like he had something final to say about Jim Gordon's relationship with Batman, which I was not expecting. What did you make of that?
Yeah, that was interesting to me too, because Gordon is always seen as this ancillary character, like he moves the plot along, but he doesn't necessarily have as much agency in the Batman stories as the costume characters did. But here it really felt like, okay, he's the lens through which we're looking at all of this, and it must be really weird to look at Batman if you're like a cop, even if you suspect who he might really be, all the havoc that he wreaks, to get some kind of emotional understanding about, hey, what the hell? This is what it means to be Batman. This is what it costs you. I thought that was a nice way to communicate that through Gordon.
Yeah, some good Gordon stuff. And then a cliffhanger at the end, which was surprising as well, because usually Morrison, when he ends his runs, I feel like you can tell he's done having stuff to say about the character. But it feels, based on the last page here, that if they wanted to, they could work with Morrison on a follow-up.
Right, and I think a lot of people would show up for that. That's a bit on Batman, part of the main DC Universe continuity, the New 52 reboot, which we're well on the way of. Yeah, I know, it's a big sigh. It's probably a huge collective sigh for a lot of fans out there. I want to talk about this book, which is a new release from DC. It's Collider. It's by Simon Oliver.
Vertigo. Vertigo lives.
Yeah, Vertigo lives, and that's kind of the interesting thing to me is that, after DC reboot their superhero universe, it seemed like anything that was remotely tethered to it but moved into Vertigo moved back to DC, which you could read the politics into that.
Swamp Thing, Constantine.
Exactly. Swamp Thing, Constantine. Anything magic related or anything slightly weird, but just with a bit of a superhero spice on it, they pulled back in. Some of that stuff has worked, some of that hasn't. But and you were left to wonder what the future of Vertigo was, especially after their longtime editorial lead left, Karen Berger. And this was the person responsible for Alan Moore and Grant Morrison and some of these other British creators coming and getting their first American work.
Ennis, right?
Garth Ennis. So to see Vertigo Reborn is really interesting because Collider is one of these books. Astro City is another book, which is a creator-owned superhero book by Kurt Busiek.
Oh, I got an alert there. Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right. And it's interesting because it feels like somewhere between what it used to be, like these really artistic, unique visions, and somewhere where most of the gravity is being pulled, which is still superhero books. And it's going to be interesting to see if they ever publish anything as weird as what the old Vertigo was.
Yeah, they have. So they have Scott Snyder doing The Wake, and they have Jeff Lemire. I never say any of this stuff out loud.
Yeah,
This
I know.
is new for me.
Jeff, please just call in and correct us.
Okay, he's doing something called Trillium, and he had done Sweet Tooth before that. But it certainly feels like Snyder and Lemire, whatever, are cherished superhero creators now for New 52, and that we're also giving them a Vertigo book so they can do something, which feels more like how Marvel handles the Icon line, which the Icon line was done to sort of try to keep Mark Miller happy and Brian Bendis happy by letting them do other things. Yeah. And so it feels like there's an aspect of that to what they're doing with Vertigo going forward, that they're also using it to try to live off past glories by having Neil Gaiman come back and do something that, I mean, Neil Gaiman doesn't usually mail it in, so hopefully this will be some real stuff, but it's a Sandman quasi-prequel that'll be better than the Watchmen prequels, clearly. And
there's like a boutique feeling for the new Vertigo stuff now.
And we're going to bring Peter Milligan back for a book, and Grant Morrison is announced is coming back for a book. The thing is that what Vertigo has an inspired confidence in, I think, is launching a new series that's going to go 60 issues. That was the thing there for a while. Yeah. It was, 100 Bullets was going to go for 100. Preacher goes for 60 or 70. Yeah. Transmetropolitan.
Why the Last Man?
And they can't sustain those anymore. And Sweet Tooth fell off much quicker than that. It seems like Unwritten is going to get there. Yeah. Fables, it feels like, and I don't read it, and I know a lot of people like it. I don't really like it. But even those who like it, I hear saying it went too long. Right. So it doesn't feel like they're doing those traditional Vertigo runs.
And what's interesting is that the kind of books that Vertigo used to make and arguably still does, as an imprint of DC Comics, the overall taste of mainstream culture as geek culture infiltrates it, like those would do really well. And it feels like some of those books were born too early, right? Like, if Why the Last Man were being published now, I think it'd be like a blockbuster hit, which isn't to say it didn't do well when it was coming out already, but I feel like people are more ready to accept these kind of fantastic ideas in their entertainment than they were even 10 years ago. So
if only good Vertigo creators like Brian Vaughan had new books to write. If only there was a publisher interested in that kind of material anymore.
I smell a segue. I'm picking this one up. Yeah, so you're talking about, obviously, Saga from Image.
Just Image in general, which has been, and it's not news to big comics readers, has been the new Vertigo for a while.
They've developed talent really well. They've taken chances on stuff that the other publishers presumably wouldn't. The creators get their share in the success of their properties, which is obviously one of the biggest reasons you go there in the first place. But thirdly, mostly is like I feel like there's this wild sense of like experimentation, of recklessness throughout all their books that, I'll take a flyer on the first issue of almost any one of their books. Like I'll be like, oh, this looks good. And, if I'm honest with myself, there's even books where I'm buying them because I like the design of it. Like, what's that science book that they're doing? That I was raving about, and I just can't remember the name.
Manhattan. Well, the Hickman
not
stuff.
Manhattan Project. It's the other one. It's the Beatles as scientists book.
The Beatles as scientists. I gotta read this. I don't know what this is. This sounds good.
Wow, I'm totally embarrassing myself here, but I'm not gonna stall any longer. I can't remember the name of the book, but I'm buying that book because it looks beautiful. Like the storyline is still like they're still obscuring a little bit of what's really going on. It's a really long, drawn out kind of run up to what feels like will be a core conflict, but I don't care. It's like, oh, here's a page that looks like a magazine designed in the 70s, like looks like Omni, and I love this, and it just looks so good. Where it's like where the making of the comic as an object like fits into the themes, and like I'm getting off on that. I think it's really great.
Can I trash a few Vertigo books,
Sure,
though?
do it.
So I read in crazy ways, and as Evan said, we're both reading on tablets, our own tablets. We're not sharing. It would be a violent situation. I think we try to share our comics. And I'd caught up on DCs, I'd caught up on Marvels, but I'd been just, as Evan pointed out, just on faith buying a lot of the Image stuff, and I would have partial runs or a lot of 1 to whatever issue before I'd realize, oh my goodness, I'm not reading any of this yet. I should wait. So while I was on vacation, I read Bedlam. I caught up 1 to 6 or 1 to 7 on that. Pretty good from Nick Spencer, who I've liked. Basically a story about what if the Joker quasi-rehabilitated or started working for the cops. Nick Spencer is saying he's trying to do simpler stories and one and dones. He's not. He's still making something that's confusing and complex and whatever. But that was actually one of the better ones I read. And what I was shocked by is that even though Saga has impressed me a ton. Manhattan Project has impressed me a ton. I trust those. But I did discover that there is a tier of image writer that I've heard great things about, and then I check their stuff out, and I'm not so impressed. Luther Strode. Everybody said that The Strange Tale of Luther Strode was amazing. Did you read it?
Yeah, I did.
I read it, and I didn't get it. I'm like, this is just a hyper-violent adolescent fantasy of how the nerd is going to become a super powerful guy and discover that the quirky girl at high school wanted to have sex with him even before he became this. His mom's going to get kidnapped. His best friend's going to try to save the day, but only he's going to be able to. It was like it had every beat of the wish fulfillment, and I felt like a lot of other image books. I just got, hell yeah, began to feel like that, so I bailed off that early. I mean, there are things like Prophet, which blow me away from image.
Sure.
But I discovered that there was a tier of image books that I started getting into with Luther Strode, hell yeah, and some others, where I'm like, wow, I'm in a different kind of adolescent fantasy that's not that much more impressive or sophisticated than the superhero stuff that Marvel and DC have been known for a long time. It's
funny you say that, though, because I found that too, but I feel like the risk is mitigated by the fact that so much of these image books are miniseries. They're compartmentalized really well so that you can stay on board for like a 5-issue run and maybe eat it if you don't love it as much as you do something else. But whereas a Marvel book, if you're like, I kind of sort of like it, I'm buying it reflexively, and you're like, where's the cutoff point? Where do I jump off? So that's another thing I think Image has in their favor.
That's a great point.
You can experiment and feel like, okay, I'm not going to get burned for like a year of mid-level crap.
And I never thought of that, but that's a great idea, a great point, because we as comic book readers become habituated to, another issue, I'll keep staying with it. And I'm realizing that I was very unsure about Witch Doctor, which was one of the books in the Kirkman line, which is essentially House or any other medical drama, but with the guy investigating demons and possessed people and what have you. And I wasn't sure about it, but I knew I only had to be in for 5 issues. So issue 1 was kind of, I'm not sure. By issue 2, and then I'm like, okay, I can spend on all 5 issues and see where it goes. And then I turned out to be on the upswing by the end of it, and so then I bought the next 5 issues.
Yeah.
So the follow-up miniseries. So yeah, great point.
So we hit DC, we hit Image. Marvel, I think, is in a really interesting place because a lot of their publishing is strong right now, but also feels like there's these weird subtexts going throughout the whole universe. And you were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. There's a lot of time travel. There's a lot of
that's intentional, I think.
Yeah, we think it's building towards their next crossover event, but it also seems to be like letting the creators do it in their own way, where like even the same characters appearing in multiple titles don't seem to necessarily jibe with each other.
The Captain America in Remender's book, I don't recognize him in, actually it's also Remender's book, Uncanny Avengers, right?
Right.
So in the eponymous Captain America, you see a very different feeling, or read a very different feeling Captain America than that one, although Remender's promising an interesting twist in all that. But it does feel like every creator has ownership of their characters, even though they don't own them. And they're able to try to do stuff with them and take them in interesting places, which is cool. We're, I think, also in an historical aberration in that we are in like that 2-week period of a year where Marvel doesn't actually have a crossover happening, maybe?
Yeah.
Because we're between what was the Bendis one that just happened?
Bendis one was Age of Ultron.
Yeah, we're between Age of Ultron, which actually ended, I guess, a month ago.
Yeah.
And Infinity, we're at like prelude to Infinity stage. So
right. It's like the solstice, right?
And I think the time travel stuff that we were talking about, where Hulk is doing time travel in his book and a bunch of others, I'm not convinced it's tied to Infinity. That might be the thing after Infinity. Yeah. And then Bendis is doing a Ultimate line crossover when Infinity ends.
Right. So it seems like they might be like setting up the pieces for a big reset.
How do they simultaneously get away with being as craven as I just described, having constant crossover, and yet also give their creators so much liberty that I feel like in the runs that I read, they're not constantly interrupted by crossover.
Right, no,
that's an impressive balance.
A book like Hawkeye or Daredevil, those books, 2 of our favorites, are just able to continue along their various plot lines without having to like pause for a big Age of Ultron crossover, which is a great feeling. It makes the books feel more individual, which is what makes you show up in the first place.
Speaking of best X-Men books, I haven't read the new issue yet. X-Men Legacy?
X-Men Legacy, which is the book you turned me on to.
Was the new issue good?
I haven't read it yet. I haven't read it yet either.
Save the dessert. That's what you do. We saving the dessert.
X-Men Legacy, really quickly, is about Professor X's son, who's the most powerful psychic in the world now, but he also has a multiple personality disorder. And it really, deconstruction as a trope in comics now is well worn, like probably overworn, overstayed its welcome. And this is a comic to me that feels like reconstruction, right? Like that takes like all the norms and conventions of superhero comics and turns them on their ear, like very, very programmatically. So like he's clearly, this is the thing he wants to do. So like the main character Legion, he hates his code name. He doesn't wear a costume. He makes fun of the X-Men, who are his father's like living legacy of like.
He thinks they're stupid, and when they cross over, he kind of just spends the issue pointing out how dumb they are and how their way of handling things is stupid.
And it's pushing the whole mutant as metaphor thing in the Marvel universe in a really interesting direction, which is that they feel strange again, right? Like his powers feels like something that he can barely control. He's got to fight his own monster in his brain to use his power, particular power. The enemies he runs into feel like weird and different. Remixes of stuff we've seen before, but also like really modern. It's it's funny, up until I started reading it, catching up on X-Men Legacy, I would have told you that Hawkeye or Daredevil are the best book that Marvel's publishing right now. But I really feel like this book is like really, really sharp in ways that a lot of other books aren't handling.
We may sound crazy, because I felt like I was sounding crazy when I came in to say to Evan, it's not Jason Aaron's Thor, it's not Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, it's not Mark Waid's Hulk, Daredevil. There's this X-Men Legacy by a dude named Cy Spurrier, who you probably haven't read anything of.
He wrote old Transformers comics, right?
Simon Furman.
Furman, you're right. I'm confusing my Simons.
Yeah. Okay. You got to read this thing. It's amazing. It's 12 issues, and it was so gratifying to have you be so impressed.
And you know what's funny? I was chatting on IM with Fahey the other day, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I love that book too." It's like it's spreading.
Let's put it this way: if you're not sold on that, there is an issue of X-Men Legacy that's about the Watchmen.
Yeah.
And they talk about the Watchmen in a Marvel book.
In a guarded way, but like there's no.
In a not very guarded way.
Yeah. There's no mistaking what he's talking about.
Which is just ballsy. So if you're not impressed with anything else we said about that, X-Men Legacy, very ballsy and therefore worth checking out.
Fair enough. So that's it. I think we've covered everything we want to talk about today.
I could go on forever.
Of course you could.
You know I could.
Don't you have a meeting right now?
I probably do.
Okay. Thanks for watching, guys.
All right.